Hello everyone, I'm Colin Canet. Today's video is all about mag switches, magnetic switches. I got lots of cool stuff, one of my favorite topics, so stick around and let's get going. So for those not familiar with what a mag switch is, basically there's a magnet inside, and when you turn the little switch on top, it drops the magnet down and it locks it onto a steel base. And you can see now when I release that how easy it is to get off, but when it's locked down, you can't lift that off. Now what we use these for very often in woodworking is jigs, particularly on bandsaws, table saws, anything with a steel deck. One of my most used jigs is this one on my drill press, and I can set this at any place and I have an instant fence lined up. Another jig that I made for the drill press is this vertical drilling fence, and I can position this anywhere I want for drilling vertical holes in wood. I've made this pivoting fence for the bandsaw, and the purpose of this, of course, is to cut veneers or thinner pieces of wood on the bandsaw. For the table saw, I made this thin strip ripping jig, and there's a little bolt in the end with a T-nut, and it's adjustable. And now you can butt your wood up to that, push that through, and get a thin strip of wood. Not long ago, I made this rolling featherboard using some old inline skate wheels, and the way it works is same as any other featherboard. Put your wood against the fence, your featherboard up against the wood, and now it holds it firmly against the fence. And one of my most recent jigs is this L fence, and it locks itself to the top of the fence on the table saw. And the purpose of an L fence is to either trim off a board, or if you've got an angle that you want to cut off at a board, you set the blade underneath the L fence, and now the new ripping fence becomes this part here of the L fence, so that when you put your new wood up against it, you can just push that through like that, and it will trim off that part underneath there. And for anybody having trouble squaring off the edge of a board, a little jig for your hand plane, and I'm amazed how well this does. A couple passes and it cleans it right up. Well, now that you've seen some of the jigs that you can use the switchable magnets for, I want to show you a couple of pre-made jigs, and these both happen to be featherboards. And the reason I really like featherboards that are made out of plastic, you can make them out of wood. The problem with wooden ones, very often, unless you get the grain perfect, very often when you put a little bit of pressure on wood on these, one of these fins will snap or two of them will snap, and when that happens, you end up having to put more pressure on the fins that are left, and the whole thing starts to disintegrate. So they really are best done in a plastic. That's the best and safest way. This little one, I'm going to show you this in a minute. It's got another little feature. This is really cool. But let's look at the featherboard part first of all, because that's what you're going to use the most of. Now, when you're using a featherboard, it's very important that the featherboard is in the right direction. So the fins want to be in such a way that it's easing the wood through. You would never want to do it this way because that's bucking. That's the wrong angle. So they need to go in that direction, and you never ever put the featherboard next to the blade or in any position where it might push on the blade. And the reason for that is if you did that, what happens, you already get kickback here. If you put pressure here, now you're putting pressure on the blade, so you'll be getting kickback in this area as well. So a very unsafe way of setting up a featherboard. So basically what we do, we set our distance wherever it is, lock the fence down, set the featherboard back here, give it a little bit of a push just so there's a little bit of flex on those fins, and you lock it down, and that's it. It's all set up and it's ready for you to run your wood through the saw blade. So let's talk a minute about the two little stops here. And they have a couple of functions. The first one is you could use it as a stop. So remember when I showed you for ripping thin strips, for example, you could use this to measure for example, something like that, move this back down here, lock that, and now when you run your wood through, you'll get exactly the same size of wood that you measured for that in. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is what I really like about this little jig. When you take this and flip it around this way, you can actually use it for cutting dados, little dados. Let me show you that. For example, if you had a piece of wood like this, and maybe you need to cut a slot into it, an insert for another piece of wood to fit in that. Usually what we do, instead of digging our dado set out, we run this through and we make multiple cuts and we measure it and hope that they're going to fit in there snugly, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. Look, you can fix that and get a perfect fit every time, and this little jig will do that for you. And the way that that works is these little things are, if you look at these, you'll see they're spring loaded. So, and there's a little wheel on there so you can actually adjust how far out these little pins go. See that? So this one here wants to be all the way in, and it doesn't matter where it is. You might need to move your fence back and forth, but so the wood that you want to cut is, let's say the slot is the thickness of this piece of wood that I have here. And what you need to do, I've measured these blades and they're a little less than 1/8 of an inch, and that's standard. But they happen to be the exact same thickness as this door skin plywood that I used a few videos ago. So we need to compensate for the thickness of the blade when we cut this slot. And the best way of doing that is to use a little stopper in there, and I can just turn that little wheel now and get that, oops, going the wrong way, and make that so that it's the same thickness as the blade, and that should, right about there, that is the thickness now. So if I were to take this board that I started off with now, and there's that slot, a nice tight slot the first time, there it is, and quick and easy. Great little tool, that little guy. And of course, the other thing that you could use these stops for is just a stop for making multiple cuts. So go there, run that through the table saw, and just if you need to cut a certain length material, be very handy for that. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you today, this is so cool. This is a vertical featherboard. And for those of you who have table saws with wider fences, almost always the center of that fence is steel. And look, there's a Magswitch on the bottom of that jig. You can put that on your fence like that. There's a little lever at the back. You take and lock that down, and that's solid on there. Then what you do is put the wood that you're going to be cutting on there, because you need to set the featherboard, and you put just a little bit of pressure on there. And now that's all ready to go. You could use, there's no reason why you couldn't use both featherboards at the same time. Good safe way of going, and depending on what you're doing, it would work just fine. So now that you've seen just an idea of some of the jigs that you can make for a variety of tools that you have, now I'm going to show you a couple of the two favored Magswitches and how the best way to drill holes for these is. In woodworking, the two most popular Magswitches are the 95 and the 150, and I always recommend the 150. Now, when you mount these into the wood that you're using, some places will include, in some packages, they'll include a Forstner bit. You can also use a hole saw to drill your holes with. Now, when they include a Forstner bit, very often what they do, if you look at the bottom of one of these, you'll see that they're not round and they're not oblong, but they will include a Forstner bit that will allow the Magswitch to sit right in there. The problem with that is when you try and spin them with one hand, they spin around. So you have two choices. You can either hold them, which is no big deal, or you can use the little screw holes that they always put in them. Now, what I like to do instead, which is much easier and it takes a tiny bit more time, but it just works so much better, instead of using what they include, the 1 1/4 or the 1 5/8, instead do what Colin does. Use the 1" for the 95 and drill one hole and then a partial hole. And what happens then, when you put that in, it drops in, and look at, you can tighten that with one hand. You don't have to put holes in, you don't have to hold it. So if you're moving from one jig to another, you can do it much more quickly. And the offset for that is 1/4 of an inch, and you can see the little plus there. So go a little more than 1/4 of an inch, go an extra 16th, because this width doesn't matter. It'll still work just fine. The same is true with the 150, only in this case, instead of buying the 5/8 drill bit, get the 1 3/8, and the offset for that one is 3/8 of an inch. And of course, when you put that in there, it moves around a little bit, but look, you can lock it with one hand quickly and easily. And when I show you, and the offset, it's plus 3/8. So I always use a measuring bar when I'm doing these. So there's the 3/8, and look at when I put the measuring bar in, you can see there's a little bit of a gap in there, and that's perfect because that allows that to drop in there easily, and you can remove it easily. So a quick way of drilling proper holes for Magswitches. So what I've been showing you today is many jigs that require sort of horizontal pressure. It's not lifting pressure, but horizontal pressure. And what I did when I first discovered these at a wood show, they were putting them on a table saw and saying, "Can you lift that?" But what I did was that. And they didn't know what to say. And I bought them anyway because I thought this was a great idea for jigs for steel tops. And I was right. Now, today I'm going to show you the difference. Now, I use this anti-skid material. I'll show you in just a second. But what I'm going to do, so here's the 95s. You can see there's no anti-skid material on there. And I have another one with some anti-skid material on there, and you'll be able to see the difference that this makes. So here's the one without, and you watch the scale here, and it's going, it joggles back and forth, but it's around 10 or 12. But watch the one with anti-skid material. That's about 15, 17. And here's the same thing in the 150s. This makes a much bigger difference. So there's the one without. There's the one with. Okay, do without first of all. And that's going up to, well, it varies. I'm going to call it 20 because it's back and forth a bit. But look at with the anti-skid material. Now this scale only goes up to 50. Oh, I don't know what that is. That's 40. And that's pretty consistent there. Now what I'm using on the bottom of this, I didn't figure this stuff out. This is a new material on the market. Jim from Columbia put me onto this stuff. This is carpeting tape, and it's called Great Tape. It's from the Nance Industries. I really like this stuff because it's only a 32nd of an inch thin, and the more you use it and clamp it down, it tends to keep it squished down even more, and it still works great. Now, a roll of this will cost you, I don't know, about 12 bucks or so, and you know what? You get a lifetime of little discs that you can basically just cut it out with scissors and put it inside the circle part of your Magswitch, and then you've got an anti-skid material. Oh, you could even use it for carpeting too if you want. But that's a great way of getting even better holding power on your Magswitches is by using that little bit of anti-skid material on there. It makes a big difference. Well, that concludes my video for today. Everything to do with Magswitches. I'm Colin Cadet for Woodwork Web. Oh, Oh, I forgot. Before I go away, for those of you who haven't heard yet, a couple of months back or so, I got an affiliation with Mag Tools. Same kind of thing as what I have with Amazon and the T-shirts. So if you're interested, you can go and check that out. I'll put all the details on Woodwork Web. Oh, and you even get a 10% discount, so that's pretty cool. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for watching.